The first time my husband called me a liar, it wasn't in private. It was in a packed courtroom. He pointed straight at me and said, "She's been pretending for years." My mother-in-law nodded without hesitation. Even the judge's expression suggested he believed every word. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but before I could speak, my legs suddenly gave way beneath me. As I collapsed onto the courtroom floor, my husband scoffed, "See? Another performance." Then a decorated military doctor rushed forward, checked me for only seconds, and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, he's been lying, not her. My name is Captain Emma Carter, and I was 38 years old when my husband looked a judge in the eye and called me a liar. Not just mistaken. Not confused. A liar. If someone had told me years earlier that the man I loved would one day try to erase my entire military career with a single sentence, I would have laughed. I trusted Daniel with every part of my life. We'd been married for 11 years. He stood beside me when I deployed overseas, wrote me letters during long assignments, and proudly introduced me as my hero whenever we attended military ceremonies. At least, that's what everyone believed. The truth began changing after my final deployment. During a humanitarian mission overseas, I suffered a severe medical complication that wasn't immediately obvious. Military doctors stabilized me, but they warned me that the condition could suddenly become dangerous under intense stress. It wasn't visible. Most days I looked perfectly healthy, which made it easy for people to doubt how serious it really was. The Army documented everything. Every examination. Every specialist report. Every restriction. When I retired with full medical documentation, I believed that chapter of my life was finally over. Daniel didn't. At first, he acted supportive. He drove me to appointments, asked questions during consultations, and held my hand whenever another specialist explained my recovery plan. But over time, his patience disappeared. "You don't look sick," he would say whenever I canceled plans after feeling dizzy. "It's probably anxiety. You've always been tougher than this." Little by little, concern turned into doubt. Doubt became frustration. Then frustration became something much colder. About a year later, Daniel filed for divorce. According to the paperwork, our marriage had become emotionally impossible because of my constant exaggerations and unpredictable behavior. Reading those words felt like staring at someone else's life. I hadn't exaggerated anything. Every medical record supported exactly what I'd been experiencing. Still, his accusations didn't stay inside legal documents. His mother repeated them to relatives. Friends stopped calling. People I'd known for years suddenly looked at me with polite sympathy instead of trust. Apparently, I wasn't a decorated Army officer anymore. I was simply the woman who pretended to be sick. The divorce hearing arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. Daniel wore his favorite Navy suit. His mother sat directly behind him with folded arms and a satisfied smile, as though today's hearing was the final step toward correcting some terrible mistake. I quietly took my seat beside my attorney. The courtroom was calm until Daniel's lawyer stood. He spoke confidently. "Your Honor, my client has spent years supporting his wife despite repeated fabricated medical episodes intended to manipulate those around her." Daniel slowly nodded. Then he looked directly at me. "She's fooled everyone for years." His words echoed through the silent courtroom. His mother leaned forward. "She's always done this," she muttered loudly enough for others to hear. Several people glanced toward me. Even the judge's expression became difficult to read. I stood, determined to defend myself. "Your Honor," I began calmly. "Every diagnosis I received came from military physicians who documented." The room suddenly tilted. A sharp wave of dizziness hit without warning. My vision blurred. I reached for the edge of the witness stand, trying to stay upright. The last thing I saw was Daniel shaking his head with a faint, dismissive smile, just before my knees gave way beneath me. My body hit the courtroom floor before I could catch myself. A collective gasp filled the room. For a moment, everything sounded distant, as though I were underwater. I could hear shoes scraping across the polished floor and someone calling my name, but my arms refused to respond. Then Daniel laughed. It wasn't loud. It was worse. It was the quiet laugh of someone convinced he'd just proved his point. "I told you," he said to the judge. She does this every time someone questions her. His mother shook her head dramatically. I've watched these little performances for years, she added. The second people stop feeling sorry for her, she suddenly can't stand. My attorney immediately knelt beside me. Emma, can you hear me? I tried answering, but only a whisper escaped my lips. The courtroom deputy reached for a phone. Before anyone could dial, a calm voice interrupted. Please don't move her. Everyone turned. A tall man in his early 60s stepped forward from the gallery. His gray suit couldn't hide the military posture he'd clearly carried for decades. He reached into his jacket and displayed an identification badge. Colonel Michael Reynolds, retired Army physician. The judge nodded. Doctor, what do you see? Colonel Reynolds crouched beside me, checking my pulse with practiced confidence. He looked at my eyes, measured my breathing, then gently lifted my wrist. His expression changed almost instantly. This isn't panic, he said quietly. He looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, these symptoms are consistent with a documented neurological condition I've treated in military personnel before. Daniel folded his arms. With respect, Doctor, she's fooled specialists before. Colonel Reynolds slowly stood.
No.
His voice remained calm. You don't fool Army medical boards. The courtroom became completely silent. The United States military doesn't approve a medical retirement based on imagination. Every diagnosis requires extensive testing, multiple physicians, specialist evaluations, and independent review. Daniel's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Colonel Reynolds continued. If her records show the condition I'm seeing right now, delaying treatment would be irresponsible. The judge immediately turned toward the court clerk. Contact emergency medical services. Within minutes, paramedics arrived. They carefully evaluated me before transporting me to the nearby military medical center. The divorce hearing was paused until doctors completed a full examination. 3 hours later, everyone returned to the courtroom. This time, my attending neurologist joined us through secure video testimony. He confirmed every diagnosis, every restriction, every medical episode, every report filed during my final years of service. Nothing had been exaggerated. Nothing had been fabricated. My attorney quietly placed a thick binder on the evidence table. Inside were years of official military medical records. The judge slowly reviewed several pages before looking toward Daniel. Mr. Carter, he asked evenly, were you aware these records existed? Daniel hesitated. I knew she had paperwork. The judge's eyes narrowed. These records show you personally signed consent forms allowing physicians to discuss her treatment with you. Daniel's confidence disappeared. His attorney whispered urgently into his ear. Then my lawyer stood again. Your Honor, she said, sliding another sealed envelope across the bench. We have additional evidence showing Mr. Carter didn't merely ignore these records.
She paused.
He actively tried to keep them out of these proceedings. The judge carefully broke the seal. As he read the first page, Daniel's face turned completely pale. The judge adjusted his glasses and silently finished reading the documents inside the sealed envelope. Then he looked directly at Daniel. Mr. Carter, would you like to explain these emails? Daniel swallowed hard. His attorney reached for the papers, but the judge stopped him. I'll summarize. The courtroom fell completely silent. These emails show that nearly 6 months before filing for divorce, you discussed your wife's documented medical condition with another attorney. He turned another page. You specifically asked whether her diagnosis could be portrayed as anxiety or attention-seeking behavior during divorce proceedings. A quiet murmur spread across the gallery. Daniel's mother slowly lowered her eyes. The judge continued. You also instructed your attorney to challenge her military medical records unless she could afford additional expert witnesses. Daniel finally stood. It wasn't supposed to sound like that. The judge looked at him. Then tell me how it was supposed to sound. Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out. My attorney calmly walked toward the evidence table. Your Honor, we'd also like to admit certified copies of Mrs. Carter's military disability evaluations, treatment history, and correspondence showing Mr. Carter attended multiple consultations with Army physicians. She handed the documents to the bailiff. The respondent cannot claim ignorance. He was present when every diagnosis was explained. The judge nodded slowly. So Mr. Carter knew exactly what his wife was living with. Yes, Your Honor. And despite that knowledge, he repeatedly represented her condition as fabricated. Correct. For the first time all morning, Daniel looked at me instead of the judge. I'm sorry, he whispered. I studied the man I'd once trusted with my entire future. The apology felt strangely empty, not because I hated him, because it had arrived only after the truth cornered him. His mother suddenly stood. Daniel, you told me those doctors couldn't find anything wrong. He couldn't meet her eyes. I simplified it. You lied to me too? No one answered. The silence said enough. The judge closed the case file. This court expects honesty from every person who appears before it. Medical conditions supported by verified military records are not matters of opinion. He paused before continuing. The evidence clearly demonstrates that Mrs. Carter acted truthfully while Mr. Carter knowingly presented false and misleading claims regarding her health. My attorney squeezed my shoulder. I finally exhaled. It felt like I'd been holding that breath for years. The divorce ruling was entered later that afternoon. The division of assets reflected the financial evidence, and the court acknowledged the documented attempts to misrepresent my medical condition during the proceedings. When everything was finished, I gathered my folder and quietly walked toward the courtroom doors. Colonel Reynolds caught up with me in the hallway. How are you feeling, Captain? Tired, I admitted with a small smile. But lighter. He smiled back. The truth usually weighs less than a lie. 8 months later, my health was improving through consistent treatment. I had accepted a civilian position mentoring wounded veterans transitioning into new careers. For the first time since leaving the Army, I felt useful again. One afternoon, I passed the courthouse where my marriage had ended. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. That building had witnessed the day my husband called me a liar. But it had also witnessed something far more important. The moment the truth stood on its own. And unlike lies, it never needed anyone to defend it.